So in the summer of 2016, some friends and I had ourselves a little adventure. It was just your average group of guys in their mid to late 20s backpacking across Europe. But the trick of that was that I was the backpack. I grew up with a disease called spinal muscular atrophy, which essentially means that the message from my brain to my spinal cord kind of has a glitch in it, gets messed up along the way, which causes my muscles to atrophy. And so that ends you up in a wheelchair most of the time at some point in your life. And so most of my life I've been in a wheelchair. And the places that we wanted to go, the things that we wanted to see and be part of in Europe were definitely not going to be wheelchair accessible. We knew this from the get-go. So we did some research and kind of figured out how we were going to pull this off. We ended up working with a company called Deuter to design a backpack that the guys could carry me in. And we left my wheelchair at the airport in Atlanta, Georgia, and flew to France, where we began our 3-week journey with no safety net. Take that back. We had a backup backpack, which is fun to say, but we had a backup just in case something broke on the first one. So we did think a little bit about a safety net, but we lived life to the fullest. There were 7 of us total, 4 carriers, 2 camera guys, because we had to prove that we did this, and myself. That's 7, right? Yeah. And we danced through the streets of Paris. We sat with gypsies on the side of the river, the Seine River. We hiked through the English countryside, and we scaled the island of Skellig Michael to see a very, very old monastery. Every step that we took, every corner that we turned, was just profound to me because we did not have to worry at all about what was accessible, where we could go and not go, based on my abilities, because it wasn't about my abilities. It was about the guys that were carrying me and what they could do, and they could do a lot. But I want to tell you more about England, because in that time, it was the 2nd week that we were traveling, we actually got to stay with a couple just south of London in a small town. They had invited us to come and stay with them. Their names were Mike and Claire. And it was really fun to explore with Mike because he ran a property management group in his small town. So he knew everybody, and everybody knew him. So we would walk down the street, and anyone that we passed by would stop and shake his hand. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Great. And he would use their name, knew everyone's name, and he would introduce us as his friends. And so whenever we weren't with him and we were walking through town, everyone would stop and say, "Oh, you're Mike's friends." So it's good to know the right people every now and then. But aside from running a property management, Mike also worked as a volunteer to keep up the land around his house and his backyard, essentially. And so one day he said, "Hey, we're going to go for a hike. We're going to walk around and show you the countryside," because his backyard basically included everyone's backyard. And it turned out to be a 6-mile hike that took most of the day. And so he started us off with a proper English breakfast and got our bellies full and headed out into the wide open country. And we hopped fences. We said hi to cows that were lowing in the field. We crossed through pastures. We ventured into the woods where sunlight would streak through in gray stripes, and And you could almost see the ghosts of men who had gone through there before, peeking around the trees. It was all just so wonderful and magical. And there were, out of our 4 carriers, there were 3 that were carrying me that day. Ben and Philip and Tom. Now, Ben is often referred to as the responsible one. He made sure we were where we needed to be, when we needed to be, when he could get all of our attention. And Philip was the kind of the studious, inquisitive one. He loved the museums, and he loved the history of places. And then Tom is famously known. In the picture, actually, Philip is the one beside us. Tom is the one carrying me there. Tom is known as the instigator, which means we got into a lot of trouble, and it was always Tom's fault. And as you can tell from the photo, he is a tall guy with broad shoulders and this great nose with wide nostrils. And when he was thinking really hard, he would squint his eyes, but when he was feeling especially mischievous, he would breathe heavy through that nose. And I know this because I could hear it even on his back from behind him. And that day, as we hiked through the countryside, I heard this breathing twice. So the first time we were in a patch of woods, and we were going along and following Mike, because that's what we were supposed to do, because he knew the lay of the land, except Tom paused. And he announced, I think I'm channeling Kevan here when I say we should go off to the right. I was not thinking this, so I don't know what he was channeling. But he said, I think we should go off to the right. And that's when I noticed that there was kind of this opening in the woods that led out into some sort of sunny green area. And so he moved that way with his breathing, his heavy breathing. And everyone else followed, because what do you do in that situation? And as we came through the opening, we came along a ridge, and there was a valley that swooped down below us for a couple miles. And at the bottom was a darker, almost black set of woods. And Mike came sauntering over, and he said, "Oh, that's an ancient wood, which you don't have in America. I'm just telling you now." And it just really floored us of what kind of world we live in, to be able to have something like that, an ancient wood. Was just amazing to us. And so the second time that I heard Tom's breathing that day came at the end of that hike. And I promise the other guys do carry me as well. We realized recently that all the pictures are of Tom carrying me, because it's when we're getting in trouble, so it makes sense. But he had rotated off, and at the end of the hike, he was back to carrying me. And we had gone up our last hill and hopped over our last fence, come out of the woods for one last time. We found ourselves at the top of a knoll. And ahead of us, maybe about a mile down, was the town that we would be returning to. And behind us and to our right were the woods that we had just come out of. And off to the left were just fields, just rolling fields. And this is when Tom's breathing started again. And he said, "This'll do." Which I thought this meant this is a nice area. And that was it. So I agreed. I said, yeah, this'll do. What I didn't realize he was referring to was a conversation we had about 3 or 4 months prior. We were on a road trip through the states, and we were out in the Midwest where it's completely flat and open land and extremely boring. So if you're driving, you have good conversation with your friends because there's nothing else to do. And we were going through a particular area where there were cornfields on either side of us, but it was the time of the year where they had cut them all down and everything. And I told Tom that day, I said, if I was able-bodied, I was driving, I would never get anywhere because I would be on a highway like this, surrounded by fields like this, and I would pull the car off to the side and get out, and I would run out into the middle of one of these fields. And he asked me, well, what would you do then? I said, I would just stand there with no distractions, no hindrances, no noise. It would just be me and God with the sky above and the ground below. And that would be it. And I think in that moment, I would feel life in my lungs, peace in my heart, and I would be free. So, we're on the English countryside, on top of a hill. And Tom says, this'll do. And I say, yeah, it will. And he says, hey guys, help me out. And the other guys, Ben and Philip, come around and help him take me off his back. And they sit me on this hill, out in the middle of the world. And they say, all right, we'll see you later. And they walked off. And I said, where are you going? He said, I don't know. I'm going to go check out that fence. We just jumped over and, we'll be back in a bit. And I started freaking out. I'm like, what are you doing? You can't just leave me here. He said, this is what you've always wanted. Take it. I said, all right. That's when I realized, that conversation. And so these guys walked off behind me. So I had no idea where they might have been standing 3 feet behind me the whole time. I don't know. But they walked off. And they may have been gone for 10 minutes or an hour. I really can't remember. I have no idea. And I took in the sight. And I watched the clouds passing by overhead. And I felt the grass rubbing up against my ankles. And I looked at those woods off to the right and the town out in front of me down the hill, the rolling hills off to the left, and I then looked back at the town and I looked past it. And I saw that there were more mountains and more hills exactly like the one I was on. And I realized I am part of this. Like I am on one of you, and I realized in that moment that I was there only because of what these guys had done for me and done with me. This was a journey that we had all taken together, and little did we know that was just the beginning. And we continue to have adventures together, but because of them, because of their love for me, their self-sacrifice, I was there on this hill, just me and God, the sky above and the ground below. And I felt life in my lungs as I took a deep breath, or a few. And I felt a peace in my heart. And for the first time, I really felt absolutely free. Thanks.